Hey guys, tonight, we trek with Jesus into the wilderness, a harsh, unforgiving desert where sand shifts like thoughts in a restless mind. You trudge alongside him, ribs aching from hunger muscles, weak but spirit fierce. Picture the blazing sun beating down, drying your mouth, dust swirling in your eyes. You probably won't survive this solo fasting gig for 40 days. But Jesus, he's about to meet a visitor who's less than friendly. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Maybe you're watching from a cozy room or somewhere just as brutal as that desert. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Jesus' journey into the desert isn't just a physical test, it's a plunge into solitude and vulnerability. According to the Gospels, after his baptism, the Spirit drives him out to the wilderness where he fasts for 40 days and nights. 40 isn't just a random number. Historically, it's symbolic in Jewish tradition, representing times of trial and transformation. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai. The Israelites wandered for 40 years. It's like a cosmic reset button for the soul. Historians generally agree that fasting was a common spiritual practice in Second Temple Judaism used to prepare for divine encounters or purify oneself. But 40 days of near starvation. That's extreme, even for the desert ascetics of the time. Some fringe scholars suggest Jesus might have practiced an altered state of consciousness, akin to shamanic fasting opening doors beyond the physical. Now the desert itself was more than a backdrop, it was a place of chaos and testing. The arid wilderness symbolized the edge of civilization where normal rules loosened. Ancient Israelites saw it as a place of both danger and divine encounter. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient Egypt. Well, in Jewish thought, the desert was a liminal zone, perfect for spiritual battles. Historians still argue whether Jesus' fasting and solitude were purely preparatory or an enactment of deeper cosmic conflict. Was the desert a battlefield, or was Jesus simply embracing an ascetic tradition? This question lingers as we consider who came to tempt him in that vast emptiness. You're still trudging through that scorching desert, with Jesus' muscles weak and mind wandering, when suddenly the atmosphere shifts. Someone or something steps into the scene, the tempter. But here's the kicker. Who exactly is this demon who tries to sway the Son of God? Is it Satan the devil, or a lesser-known figure from ancient lore? The Gospels commonly identify this figure as the devil or the tempter, but the Greek term diabolos literally means slanderer or accuser. It's a word loaded with meaning, but not necessarily the formal name of a being. Some early manuscripts even vary on the titles used. This ambiguity leaves us with a puzzle. Was this the cosmic adversary Satan, or a more generic personification of evil? Historically, Satan, as a proper name, didn't fully crystallize in Jewish thought until after the Babylonian exile. Before that, the Hebrew term Satan simply meant accuser or opponent, often describing any adversary, heavenly or earthly. In the book of Job, for instance, the Satan appears as a sort of prosecuting attorney in God's court, rather than an evil rebel. This idea complicates the identity of the desert tempter. One quirky tidbit. In some Dead Sea Scrolls writings, Satan or evil spirits are depicted with a council of demons, a sort of infernal bureaucracy. So maybe the figure in the desert was more like a CEO of temptation rather than a lone wolf. Makes you wonder if he took a lunch break or had interns. In Greco-Roman culture circulating at the time, demons were often seen as intermediary spirits capable of good or evil influence. Some scholars propose the tempter might reflect a hybrid concept, part Jewish adversary, part Hellenistic demon. The blending of these traditions was common in the culturally rich Palestine of the 1st century. Historians still argue whether the Gospel writers intended the tempter as a literal personal being with cosmic power, or as a literary device symbolizing the struggles Jesus faced. This debate colors every retelling of the temptation. So as you squint against the desert sun, wondering who that shadowy figure truly was, you realize the answer is more tangled than a desert tumbleweed. Still walking beside Jesus, the desert wind picks up, carrying whispers from ancient beliefs about demons and evil spirits. Around Jesus' time, ideas about these dark beings were swirling through Jewish and Greco-Roman cultures, like dust storms, some clear, some confusing, many contradictory. In Second Temple, Judaism, demons were generally seen as malevolent spirits causing illness, misfortune, or spiritual blindness. The Book of Tobit, part of the Apocrypha, tells of the demon Asmodeus, a nasty fellow who kills 7 husbands before they can marry Sarah. Such stories shaped popular imagination. Demons weren't just metaphors, they were real agents of chaos. The Pharisees and Sadducees had varying views too. Some believed demons were fallen angels, others saw them as created beings under God's control, but bent on evil. And then there were the Essenes, with their elaborate dualistic worldview from the Dead Sea Scrolls describing a cosmic struggle between the sons of light and sons of darkness, involving hordes of evil spirits. Greco-Roman influence added another layer. Philosophers like Plutarch and Pliny described daemons, Greek for spirits, as intermediaries between gods and humans, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful. This fluidity meant that, by Jesus' day, the lines between demon spirit and God were blurrier than a mirage. A quirky bit. Some folk traditions included apotropaic rituals like carrying garlic or making noise to ward off demons, much like modern superstitions. So maybe Jesus was not only fasting, but mentally armor-plated against an army of unseen forces. Historians still argue whether Jesus' temptations were meant to confront a specific demonic personality or a generalized force representing evil and temptation itself. The lack of detailed demonology in the Gospels leaves room for interpretation. This tangled mix of beliefs forms the backdrop as you and Jesus face down the mysterious figure in the desert. Whether demon devil or something in between, the tempter belongs to a world where spirits walked alongside humans in shadowed corners. As the desert sun blazes overhead, you recall how Satan, if that is indeed who the tempter is, has evolved in Scripture over centuries. The figure that confronts Jesus in the wilderness isn't a fresh invention. He's the product of a long, complex evolution stretching back through Old Testament stories and beyond. In early Hebrew texts, Satan was more a role than a name, a heavenly prosecutor testing human faithfulness, like in Job's story. This Satan works under God's permission, not in outright rebellion. But by the time of the New Testament, he morphs into the archetypal adversary of God and mankind. The intertestamental period, those centuries between the Old and New Testaments, introduced apocalyptic writings like the Book of Enoch, which expanded on fallen angels and cosmic rebellion. Here, Satan becomes a leader of rebellious spirits who corrupt humanity. These ideas percolated into the cultural consciousness Jesus and his audience shared. In the Synoptic Gospels, Satan appears not just as tempter, but as the prince of demons, a force to be resisted and defeated. When Jesus casts out demons, he declares war on Satan's kingdom, signaling a spiritual showdown. So the desert temptation is no mere test of will. It's a clash of cosmic powers. A quirky side note. Early Christian art sometimes depicted Satan with animal features, goat horns, tail, even cloven hooves, reflecting pagan imagery and popular fears. This mix of symbolism shaped medieval portrayals that still haunt culture today. Historians still argue whether the gospel authors meant Satan literally or used him as a metaphor for the inner struggles Jesus faced. The Greek word diabolos and Hebrew Satan carry overlapping but distinct meanings, making the identity of the tempter slippery. So as you stand in the desert heat beside Jesus, the figure before him is a layered symbol, part ancient prosecutor, part cosmic rebel, part embodiment of temptation's power. The desert stretches on, and as you walk, The temptation scenes flicker through your mind like a trilogy on loop. Matthew, Mark, and Luke each tell the story with subtle differences, like three friends recalling a shared memory, but emphasizing different moments. These variations add layers to understanding the tempter's identity. Mark's version is brief, naming the devil as the tempter, but focusing more on Jesus' testing. Matthew and Luke are more detailed, listing three specific temptations, turning stones into bread. Throwing himself off the temple pinnacle to test God's protection and worshiping the tempter in exchange for all the world's kingdoms. Interestingly, Matthew's and Luke's accounts differ in the order of the last two temptations. It's like watching a movie with alternate endings. Scholars debate why. Some suggest different theological emphases. Matthew's version highlights the importance of temple worship, while Luke stresses political power's temptation. The tempter is always a singular figure, but the names vary. Matthew and Luke call him the devil, and Satan seemingly interchangeable, but loaded with nuanced meaning. Mark keeps it simple with the devil. This variety hints at evolving concepts of evil. A quirky observation. Some manuscripts even use the term the evil one to describe the tempter blurring lines between personal being and abstract force. It's like calling someone the jerk, but not naming them directly. Historians still argue whether these gospel writers aimed to record historical events or to craft theological narratives teaching about Jesus' authority and mission. The identity and nature of the tempter play a central role in these messages. So as you pace the desert sands with Jesus, you realize the tempter's identity is both a character and a concept shaped by faith culture and story. The desert air still warm as you continue walking. Your thoughts turn to those shadowy corners of ancient literature where alternative demon figures lurk, texts outside the official biblical canon but alive in early Christian imagination. These apocryphal writings, like whispers from a hidden library, offer glimpses of other tempters who might have crossed paths with Jesus or at least influenced how people understood the desert encounter. Take the Book of Jubilees, for example. It mentions spirits of wrongdoing and fallen angels who lead humanity astray, painting a vivid cosmic battle behind earthly events. While it doesn't name the tempter directly, the portrayal of evil spirits there gives texture to the idea of spiritual adversaries active in Jesus' world. Then there's the Gospel of Thomas, a mysterious collection of sayings, some of which hint at inner spiritual battles, resembling temptation, but without naming a devil figure. Some scholars suggest these texts reflect a more symbolic or mystical interpretation of Jesus' trials, focusing on enlightenment rather than literal demonic confrontation. Another intriguing text is the Testament of Solomon, where King Solomon is said to command demons, including names like Asmodeus and Belial, personalities familiar in later demonology. While not directly tied to Jesus' temptation, such stories show how richly demonology was woven into early Jewish and Christian folklore. A quirky tidbit. The apocryphal Acts of Peter describe a demon named Simon who tries to test Peter's faith. It's like the desert temptation story was a popular template reused with different players for different spiritual heroes. Historians still argue whether these apocryphal demons influenced gospel writers, or if the gospel's tempter figure helped shape later demonology. The lines blur between text and tradition, making the desert tempter a nexus of many spiritual threads. So as you ponder the tempter's identity, remember it's part of a vast tapestry of stories, some canonical, some hidden, all contributing to how ancient people understood the forces opposing the divine. As the desert heat presses in, early Christian voices rise through history, interpreting that shadowy figure who tempted Jesus with a mixture of awe, fear, and theological reflection. The early church fathers didn't just accept the tempter as a simple character. They wrestled with his nature, significance, and role in salvation history. Take Justin Martyr in the 2nd century. He portrays Satan as a real being, an angel who rebelled against God and now rules the fallen world, constantly opposing God's plan. For Justin, The desert temptation was a cosmic battle showing Jesus' superiority over evil. It wasn't just a personal test. It was the opening move in Jesus' campaign to redeem humanity. Origen, a few decades later, leaned into allegory, suggesting the tempter symbolized the passions and desires that Christians must conquer. His writings mix literal and metaphorical readings, reflecting a church still figuring out how to explain spiritual warfare. Then there's Augustine, whose theology deeply shaped Western Christianity. He identified Satan as a fallen angel whose pride led to his fall. Augustine saw the temptation as a moment when Jesus decisively rejected sin's allure, foreshadowing his ultimate victory on the cross. A quirky note. Some early art depicts the tempter as a serpent echoing Eden's story, while others show him as a dark-robed figure with a sneaky grin, highlighting different cultural ideas about evil. Historians still argue how much these early interpretations shaped popular Christian belief, and how much they reflect later theological developments imposed back onto the gospel stories. Did the desert tempter become more fearsome because early Christians needed a villain to explain evil's persistence? So walking through early church, thought you see the tempter's identity morphing, sometimes literal, sometimes symbolic, but always central to understanding Jesus' mission. The desert sun starts to dip low, casting long shadows as you move deeper into the scholarly debates that swirl around the identity of Jesus' tempter. Academics today don't always agree on who or what this figure truly was, whether a literal cosmic adversary, a symbolic representation, or something in between. Some scholars argue the tempter is unquestionably Satan, the personal embodiment of evil and the enemy of God's kingdom. This view takes the gospel accounts at face value, seeing the temptation as a real encounter between Jesus and a malevolent being, with intentions to derail his mission. Others suggest the tempter is more a literary device, a personification of internal human struggles, fears, and desires. In this reading, the desert becomes a stage for Jesus to confront and master the temptations that all humans face: power, security, and spiritual shortcut, making the tempter a symbol rather than a character. Then there are those who propose a middle ground. The tempter represents an actual spiritual force, but the narrative is crafted to communicate deeper theological truths rather than a straightforward historical account. This approach acknowledges cultural context, narrative techniques, and theological purpose. A quirky insight. Some postmodern theologians explore the tempter as a mythic archetype, tapping into Jungian psychology, where the shadow self embodies the parts of us we repress. This makes Jesus' battle in the desert an eternal human drama playing out within every soul. Historians still argue whether the gospel writers intended their audience to understand the tempter literally, metaphorically, or theologically. The debate affects how we read not only the temptation, but Jesus' entire ministry. So as the desert night falls, the tempter remains an enigmatic figure, part demon, part symbol, part mirror, reflecting human vulnerability. The desert chill starts creeping in, and with it comes a shift in perspective. What if the tempter isn't just an external figure lurking in the shadows, but also an internal force wrestling within Jesus' own mind and spirit? Some psychological and symbolic readings invite us to see the temptation as a profound inner battle, a moment where the human and divine intersect in struggle. Modern thinkers often view the tempter less as a literal demon and more as a representation of the doubts, fears, and desires that all humans experience. The three temptations, turning stones to bread, testing God's protection, and gaining worldly power, are classic human longings for survival, security, and significance. In this light, the desert becomes a metaphorical arena where Jesus faces the ultimate choices. A quirky fact: Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, saw figures like Satan as archetypes of the shadow, those hidden parts of the self we reject or deny. Jesus' confrontation with the tempter might symbolize embracing and overcoming this shadow to achieve wholeness. Some scholars argue that this interpretation helps explain why the Gospels present the tempter's voice in direct conversation, because it dramatizes the inner dialogue we all experience. It's less about a battle between two beings and more about one soul wrestling with temptation and purpose. Historians still debate whether this psychological reading aligns with the original intent of the Gospel writers or is a modern lens layered over ancient texts. Either way, it opens fresh doors to understanding the humanity of Jesus and the universal nature of temptation. So as the desert night deepens, you sense the tempter not just outside, but inside, a reminder of the complex terrain every human heart must navigate. The desert's stillness wraps around you as the final light fades and you begin to see why the question, who was the demon that tempted Jesus in the desert, matters deeply, not just as a historical or theological puzzle, but as a mirror for our own spiritual journeys. Whether the tempter was Satan, a generalized spirit of evil, an internal struggle, or a symbolic figure, this encounter sets the tone for Jesus' mission, a mission defined by resistance, purpose, and unwavering faith. It tells us that temptation is real, persistent, and personal, yet conquerable. In modern faith, communities, the identity of the tempter influences how believers understand evil and suffering. For some, a literal devil is a personal enemy to resist through prayer and moral vigilance. For others, temptation is an internal battle calling for self-awareness and discipline. A quirky modern twist, pop culture often depicts Satan as a suave, sometimes even charming character, a far cry from the desert tempter's austere menace. This contrast highlights how cultural imaginations evolve and why returning to the biblical narrative matters. Historians still debate how much the tempter's identity shapes Christian doctrine on evil, free will, and redemption. Yet, the story's power lies in its enduring relevance, reminding you that, like Jesus, you face your own deserts and tempters in moments big and small. So, as the desert night whispers to a close, remember, the identity of the demon may be shrouded, but the call to stand firm, to choose faith over fear, and to embrace your own trials with courage is crystal clear.